people who are most likely to succeed. What's the secret of their success? Let's see if Nick Baxter can help us find the answer.
What have these kids got that I haven't got anyway? That's what I have to do with my own future. I've got to look ahead and imagine.
Hi there. A photographer is faced with a number of aesthetic considerations when beginning a project. The decisions that one makes at this stage will shape not only the look of the work, but also its conceptual depth and internal logic. Some photographers stick to one way of working throughout their lifetime. And in fact, this actually suits galleries because in terms of marketing, these photographers are easier to package to collectors. If one has a more eclectic approach towards one's work, then aesthetic considerations need to be seen as a tool that can be adapted to enhance chapters of one's communication. I definitely fall into this camp. My subject over the past 40 years has remained largely constant. How Southern and particularly South Africa has transformed socially, culturally, and politically. In this video, I'm going to look at 8 aesthetic considerations and use various of my bodies of work to illustrate the decisions that I made at the time. I'll start with subject or intent. It's important to define your core theme or themes so that when you go out shooting, you have some compass point to aim at. These pictures come from a book called The Inner City, and they illustrate a particular moment in history when Johannesburg was undergoing a major transformation at the end of apartheid. Usually at the beginning of an essay, I like to provide room for my subconscious to have its say. So I usually allow for a lot of flexibility and modification. I might logically think that I want to pursue a particular angle, but then I often find that I'm drawn along a different route. In this case, the theme of isolation became dominant. Other thoughts that relate to this section could include whether the project is descriptive or evocative, straight documentary or lyrical, and to what extent you want it to be a personal reflection. There are no fixed rules about this choice, but in simple terms, shooting in monochrome immediately establishes a level of abstraction. We experience the world in color, so by removing the color palette, one is creating a more detached representation of the thing that one is photographing. These photographs come from a book called The Edge of Town, and they illustrate the uneasy state of many communities in early post-apartheid South Africa. I actually began photographing in black and white, but wasn't achieving a raw immediacy in my pictures. So I switched to color and then began to find an edginess through harsh, saturated colors. There's always a responsibility that comes with shooting in color, because the tones that one chooses hold specific meanings. The choice of color palette within the individual photographs and throughout the essay will actually influence the atmosphere. Color itself becomes a subject, or at the very least becomes a significant aspect of the subject. Black and white has traditionally been used to emphasize somber or dramatic moods. It can intensify an atmosphere like, say, nostalgia. In terms of composition, it can more directly highlight shape, line, texture, and contrast. Light can serve as a means of unifying a set of pictures. The level of consistency of the lighting will determine the degree to which you want to maintain a consistent mood. The type of light can also influence the meaning. The pictures from the previous essay I showed you relied on intensely directional light to enhance tension, while for this essay called Hard Ground, I utilized mixed forms of ambient light with some occasional fill-in lighting. I would also often use very long exposures. Most of these portraits were taken deep underground in various types of mines, and I wanted the pictures to reflect the challenging conditions in which these people worked. If I had chosen, say, to use strobe lighting and maybe an artificial backdrop, the effect and message would have been very different. It could have been interesting in a different way because the subjects would then have been viewed out of context. The mix of light tones within these pictures adds to the atmosphere. The spaces within these mines are so otherworldly and often oppressive and dangerous. But, of course, for the people who work there, it's just an everyday workplace. I'm going to contrast two very distinct bodies of work that required very different approaches. They reflect a marked change in my attitude and confidence about South Africa's future as political events set the country on a course to economic ruin. While photographing urban landscapes for the first essay, Painting Over the Present, I was looking for signs of optimism and finding instances where these feelings were reflected in painted structures. The pictures are largely unpeopled and are contemplative. So I chose to work with a Hasselblad medium format camera, often using a tilt and shift adapter, and all of the images were taken using a heavy tripod. I felt that the 645 format added a sense of solidity. The pictures were formally composed. I usually set up the camera facing straight onto the subject, and this adds to making the scenes appear restful. A few years after completing these pictures, the government started to embrace corruption on an industrial level. Crime skyrocketed and public safety was really low down on the agenda. As the country's economy plunged to junk status, the systems began to further fall apart. I wanted this project never again to reflect my personal feelings of disappointment, anger, and fear. The 35mm frame, when used in both portrait and landscape format, can be energetic and sometimes jarring. I'd also switched to black and white, which I'd shelved after the dark times of apartheid. The 35mm camera allowed me to take more immediate dynamic pictures, which fitted my agitated frame of mind. So choosing which camera to use isn't just an arbitrary choice. It's actually like choosing a voice. In the previous essay that I showed, the pictures were very loosely framed with little regard for preserving the correct perspective. In fact, I wanted the images to be unsettling. This essay, Showtime, consists of portraits taken at agricultural shows throughout South Africa. It explores the Afrikaner culture, but primarily it's about the individuals that I chose to photograph. The topic of framing and composition obviously has overlaps with the section on camera and format, but I wanted to look at how one structures one's images. In these portraits, the whole frame supports the central figure or figures, and the square format is great for this. That's why the old Hasselblad film camera was so popular with portrait photographers. Psychologically, it's been researched that when one views a square item or picture, one gets a sense of reliability or even significance. So for portrait photographers, the square format does some of the heavy lifting on a subconscious level. On the other hand, if one chooses to do off-center compositions, one is immediately adding tension and uncertainty, which is great if you want to communicate an edgy idea. Consistency of both framing and composition produces a sense of coherence throughout your essay. So you can decide whether you want to hold this throughout the essay or you want to make it more fluid. Framing and composition are the building blocks for ideas around rhythm and what is termed the grammar of an essay, or organizational structure. I'm going to use images from another book, A City Refracted, to illustrate the last three aesthetic choices. This project was an oblique look at the chaotic state of the overpopulated and underdeveloped city of Johannesburg. If one decides to communicate through symbols and metaphors rather than reporting or documenting, then one's opening up a Pandora's box of options, which can range in complexity. You have to ask, do you want the symbols to be clear and recognizable, say through something like religious or political symbols? Or do you want the communication to be more ambiguous using shadows, movement, gestures, or recurring colors? Cyclic themes and symbols can produce a rhythm, and they can anchor the message that you're sending. These pictures that I'm showing you now utilize movement and blurring. They emphasize the confused and unsettled nature of the city. I didn't want to produce photographs that directly documented this aspect. Rather, I wanted to convey my personal response to the turmoil. As I mentioned earlier, shooting in black and white is already a choice in the direction of abstraction. In these photographs from the same book, I'm using color fields, shapes, and line to draw attention to the refracted nature of life in the city. There's very little cohesion, integration, or sense of community. In fact, some parts of the city are segregated along the lines of various African nationalities. If I was wanting to produce more journalistic photographs, then the tool of abstraction wouldn't have been so relevant. I could have just shown the day-to-day differences between the communities in different sections of the city. Again, this can be communicated directly or obliquely. A journalist would make reference to the 5 W's and an H: who, what, where, when, why, and how. While a more oblique approach would be to hint at the passage of time through some form of time-based reference. In this essay, the links to the past draw attention to both the whites-only status of the city during apartheid, as well as the lack of infrastructural development since then. Black and white photographs can more easily invoke timelessness, while it's really difficult to escape the now when using color. Even Saul Leiter's expressionistic New York images are rooted in a specific time period. There are, of course, other aesthetic considerations that I could have spoken about, but I think I'll leave it there. Thanks for staying with me, and I'll see you next time.
Now what's the matter? Can't I even build a simple table?